Well, hello. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, good middle of the night to you, wherever you may be. It is Tuesday, the 7th of September. It's not Tuesday, is it? It's Thursday. See how you lose the days. Welcome to the show. I'll get this sorted in a second. Well, welcome. It's Thursday evening. My, how time flies. So for the next couple of hours, I'm going to be going through quite a few things. It's going to be a bit of a smorgasbord of a show. It's my return back to the microphone for the first time in a couple of years in a proper sort of way. I've had my technical trousers on all afternoon. Not that you need to know that kind of stuff, but you know it now. And I even get to play groovy music, or something like that. Hi everybody, welcome to the show. The Paul English Live show, something that I've been putting off for quite a while, actually. So if you're turning up and hearing me for the first time, me referencing things that I've done in the past might seem a little bit odd, but what I thought I'd do tonight, or this afternoon, depending on where you are in the world, is just run through a few pointers as to why I'm doing this show, really. That sounds quite thrilling, doesn't it? But many of you will kind of know. But I used to do a show with a gentleman called Andrew Carrington Hitchcock, which ended about 2 years ago, and it turned out that we'd been doing that for years, for a very long time, and the time just presented itself to have a break, so I did. Also, we've had all the fun of COVID for the past few years, which is so the timing seemed the right sort of thing to do, and then I've been involved in helping other groups all over the place doing these sorts of things, and finally decided to take the plunge. So I have to tell you, today's show is, I think using the word show is probably quite a liberal use of the word. I've had so much to do today with regards to getting the hang of things like Rumble and Odyssey and all sorts of other things. I'm not even looking at them just yet. I'm just assuming it's all working. But just to let you know, this show is going out, the home base for it is paulenglishlive.com, which is probably, I think, where you've sort of turned up to or from. And from there are links to Rumble. First time I've ever used a video platform for live streaming, because I'm not much of a video guy, as you can probably tell from the ridiculous image that's on the screen. Oh, by the way, I think I need to change that, don't I? Look, I've got all these different buttons that I've got to do. Let's put the show image up. Here we go. There we go. Just coming into view. Nice balloon. I'll talk about that in a minute or two. So yeah, this is the first time we've gone out, or I've gone out of Odyssey. Odyssey and Rumble. So that's two things. I thought I'd bite off more than I could chew, and that's really what's happened. Actually, I've bitten off more than I could chew. We're also streaming live on an audio player at pretty good audio quality on paulenglishlive.com, and this show is also being picked up on simulcast by speakfreeradio.com. So wherever you are in the world, and if you're listening and tuning in and you're hanging around and all that kind of stuff, that's great. Thanks for turning up. As I said, there'll be people here, I guess, in the audience who kind of know a little bit about me in terms of what I've done over the past, X number of years during this fun century, which of course kicked off with 9/11. And thinking about that, of course, the the anniversary of that tragic event is not far off now, is it? In fact, we're just a couple of days away from it. Where are we? Thursday? See, I'm getting my days right now. Now my brain's working. And so Saturday, I guess this Saturday for that event. One of the things I was going to say at the beginning of the show, of course, is that September, here we are, 7 o'clock on the 7th day of the 7th month of the year. And this, of course, sounds a little bit bonkers, but September, of course, is the 7th month of the year, isn't it? And it would prove it if October was the 8th, and of course it is, because Oct is named after octopus. They've got 8 testicles or something like that. And then you've got November for Neuf and December, which of course would mean that March, which is a fantastic month for all sorts of reasons, which I won't go into now, but March would be the first month of the year. Anyway, calendrical mayhem aside, I don't know if that's a word, but I just made it up. Here we are, ready to rock and roll. What I thought I'd do tonight, because some of you will have not heard of me before, and some will, but I thought I would just take this opportunity on this test flight pilot show, hoping that the plane doesn't nosedive anywhere, to just give you a bit of background, a run-up as to why I'm here doing this. I think I mentioned that a couple of minutes ago, and I'm just hoping to settle in with all these blasted buttons and things. So, and I've got little messages popping up and distracting me, so that's quite interesting too. Don't worry, all this clutter in my mind will go slowly but surely. So, and of course, I've been thinking about this for weeks. Ha! So it's a Billy No Mates production tonight. I don't have any guests lined up for tonight. I've got the possibility to take in calls later. We might do that. We might not. If we do, it'll be towards the back end of the 2 hours. Always dangerous taking those calls in from all these rowdy listeners. But we may well do that. So I want to just give you a sort of a bit of a preamble, a run-up to this. So how's this all begin for me, basically? And just think, you're only going to have to hear this once. I won't be doing this all the time. It all gets a little bit tiresome, doesn't it? People droning on about all these sorts of things. But I think it's kind of relevant here. You'll understand why there's going to be particularly an emphasis on banking, which I know you're all thrilled about. No doubt you woke up this morning thinking, boy, I could do to listen to some radio show on banking and compound interest and usury and all those sorts of things. Well, I'm not going to grind away on that topic, but it will be a constant sort of subtext to practically everything I think we're going to look at. So, for those of you that don't know, I'm from Yorkshire, and I used to talk like that a lot, actually. I used to say things like Bath and Saturday, and I can still do it, as you can see. But in the early 80s, I moved down to London from my home county. I've been back loads there. Used to go back loads to see my parents. But I moved down in the prescient year of 1984. The symbolism of this was completely lost on me at the time. I was just eager to try and crack on with life. And I ended up working in a very interesting company, which was kind of half company, half cult. It was very nice. It was a lovely cult, actually. We had a lovely time there. And that was very challenging and very interesting, and lots of emphasis on understanding things like communication and stuff like that, behavioral psychiatry or whatever you want to call it, that kind of stuff. But it was great. I made a lot of good friends there, some of which I'm still connected to this day. But come the early 90s, I no longer was there for all sorts of good reasons, and I set off and started to become a freelance copywriter. And basically, I think the word was free because I seemed to be working for free all the time, and so it didn't really work out too well for me. And about 1992 or 3, I ended up working with a colleague in a place which was for librarians. It's getting exciting now, isn't it? Librarians, yes. And the reason I was there, apart from flogging directories over the phone to people, was that they had this thing called the internet. You may have heard of it. It's been around ever since then. But this was very early days. This is 93, 94, that kind of time. And this association had an ISDN line, which was gold dust at the time. I think it ran at 128 kilobits a second, which was amazing. Of course, how we laugh now looking back on these things. But at the time, I remember being colossally impressed with it. This is when modems were running at like 2.8K. Maybe some people are listening don't even know what on earth I'm talking about, because that's 30 years ago. But it was a real thrill to get on it back then. It's still, of course, it's evolved all the time, and it's a key part of what truth enquirers have got in their lives. I mean, without it, much of the information, nearly all of the information that we've been able to get hold of over the last 20 or 30 years, we wouldn't have been able to get it. I mean, we just didn't even know really that this sort of information even existed, let alone grab a hold of it. So this 128K thing was amazing, and, got an email address, very exciting, and joined Usenet, which still trundles on to this day, all these news groups, which were then full of really interesting stuff if you knew how to plow through it. And I remember someone saying at the time, boy, it's like being nostalgic, isn't it? They'd got an email address, and every morning when they woke up and there wasn't an email there, they felt slightly depressed. I bet you feel like that too today. Of course, we're in overwhelm, masses of over communication, are we not? But it was a fantastic place there, and I met my first geeks there. I was in my early 30s at the time, and they would come down. One of the guys there, very bright guy, he's no longer with us. He's shuffled off this model coil, unfortunately, but a very nice guy. And he had a lot of friends in Cambridge and Oxford, and these guys would come down and they would eat pizza. I mean, so I don't think anything's really changed. And they would talk about wargaming and all this kind of stuff, and then they would whir away on code. So I got to see what they did and how they were thinking about things, and we got to play around with things. I sort of built a website, I think around about 96 or 97, something like that. Maybe it's a little bit later, after the advent of, web browsers and all that kind of stuff. But the really important thing for me was that there were meetings down there that used to take place outside of work hours from like 5:30 onwards, because librarians tend to, pack up early and go home. Books are very tiring things. But these meetings were really interesting. All sorts of people would turn up that were connected to some of the people that would work there, just to discuss ideas, and I guess kind of inspired by the technology as it was arriving and looking at what you could do with it. There was one gentleman that turned up there, was very softly spoken, and so began a roller coaster ride for me. I didn't realize this at the time, but it was a very big and chunky sort of roller coaster ride. And he'd returned back to England, very softly spoken man, not physically overpowering in any way, very bright, very simple sort of language, but it's what it contained. And he'd come back from Saudi Arabia, I think it was, or the Middle East. He would be, at that time, probably in his 40s, I think. I'm guessing, mid-40s. And he'd been out there for quite a while, and he was distributing newsletters to many of his colleagues and business associates back here in the UK, courtesy of the dreaded laser printer, which I know we're all familiar with. And he started giving me copies of these things. And this was the beginning of me moving into a different world of knowledge, frankly, because these newsletters contained information about banking and the financial system from a point of view, like I said earlier, that I didn't even know existed. And it made for very, very arresting reading. There were a lot of documents about the history of these islands. When I say that, I mean Britain and the surrounding islands, how it's been used for a long time as a nest for criminals. All these things are relevant to where we're at today, by the way. This is why I'm sort of running through them. This line, up and down history, I think is important. It is, as long as we apply it to today and see where the lessons are. Whether we can learn from them is the next big challenge, but they are there. And I started to read these things. I learned about the manipulation of the pop music industry, something that had never occurred to me. What? MI5, Tavistock, involved. All these organizations were written down in his document, and much of this stuff was not on the internet at this time. This is 1994, 95. In subsequent years, I began to check and verify all these things from multiple sources. But that was just the beginning. He was involved in the banking industry himself. He wasn't a banker as such. He was a man that was involved with trading paper, bank paper, T-bills and that kind of stuff. And I will not go into the labyrinthine, detailed nature of what he did because I'd be here all night and it would bore all of us, I think, a little bit. But the gist of it is that the system is rigged. Now, I know many people listening to this will already know that. But back in 94, 95, I could have said it offhand, as a turn of phrase. But how it was rigged was something else. And it turned out that there were groups of people in the world who were making colossal profits at zero risk. Zero, literally no risk at all. And in a complex arrangement for seizing and pulling cash out of society. Banks were looking very much for cash-rich businesses or cash-rich individuals. And we're talking about, people with very, very deep and large pockets at the time. And a whole series of communications sprang up between me and him. And I ended up sort of seeing him regularly for business meetings and chats all over the place. I remember at one point, this would be 1995, 96, nearly 30 years ago, good gravy. We were sat at Liverpool Street Station having a coffee for a couple of hours and talking about things. And he mentioned to me about the use of credit cards, which of course had been in full swing for X number of years by then. And the real purpose being for the removal of cash. Now, where are we now today? So these sort of signposts I've had in my head for about 25 years, but they were almost pointless to communicate back then because no one had a context to fit them into. Everything was going swimmingly well, just as it is today, So that's this sort of period that I had with him where a lot of information came my way. Information about cash, information that you don't own anything much, that the money that's in the bank account is the bank's. There are these things called the bailment laws, which were discussed in England in the 1800s, late 1800s. I can't give you the judge. They went on for a long time, but basically the outcome of it was, if there's a rush on the bank, can the bank use what you think is your money? And the answer was yes, so therefore it's not your money, is it? Because it's under their control. And the use of cash, I'll just tell you one other rather strange thing. I mean, I may come back to him to illustrate certain points in the weeks and months ahead, given that there are weeks and months ahead for all of us with this. I think there should be. I don't want to get too pessimistic too early on in the show. But the British government, after after World War II, of course, was involved in the lovely old Cold War. And nuclear weapons had proliferated. So they built a series of nuclear bunkers, protection bunkers, around London. In fact, there was a story in the papers a couple of years ago about one up in, I think, North London that was up for sale, some massive sort of thing, which, maybe we should all chip in and buy it. Might be a safe place for us to go. Who knows? But he'd bought one. There was a farmer out in Essex. That was one of the places. There were 4 or 5 of these things, all within sort of like 30 minutes underground tube or whatever from the centre, so that they could get out, you see. Very important, of course, because we need our political class, don't we? And he'd bought one. And he was stuffing it with cash. Now, you don't have to believe anything I'm telling you at all, by the way. It's such a bizarre tale. But one of his game plans was to choke the economy of cash to force the banks to come to the table. Now, this all sounds very, very odd. And if he were here, he'd be able to illustrate a little bit more. But it was an astonishing period. It was very intense at times. He could be very kindly and then as cold as the Antarctic. I've never met anybody quite like him. He was formidable in an intellectual way that I've never come across before. He was dyslexic. He spoke several languages, though, in a dyslexic type of way. But a really astonishing thing was the notes that he used to keep in our meetings. And I came across some last week. Maybe at some point, if I can get off my bottom, I'll get these things scanned and put them up if they're of interest. He would keep his notes in our meeting in a version of Arabic shorthand that couldn't be read by anybody else. He showed it to me. It's quite wonderful to look at. And he said, this is my own language. I keep all my notes in this specific language. And I can leave all my papers lying around the office, and if it gets robbed. And just to let you know, the office is, I don't know why I'm going on about this, but maybe it's the only time, the last time I would talk about it, really. So in the offices, it was like James Bond. I'm not kidding. It was ridiculous. There were sliding walls. There were secret compartments. There were electrified carpets. And I was so green. I went, is all this really necessary? You know, because I used to speak like that back then. I did not, of course. But it was. And he had this idea about security and all these sorts of things. When he'd moved back to England, by the way, he came back to actually ostensibly look after his mum. And a good friend of mine who was hanging around earwigging this information at the time went to visit him one day at his house. I never got to do that, but he came back and he said, "Have you ever been over there?" And I said, "No." He actually did speak like that. I say, he was really one of those guys, a lovely man. And he actually did sport a monocle too, but I'm going to keep his name private for now, but wonderful guy. And he said, "Do you know how many telephone lines he's got in there?" I said, "No." He said, 52. I said, "What?" There were 52 lines, telephone lines, with phones, obviously, at the end, all on scramblers, all on coded stuff. That's what people used back then. This is just pre-internet days. And even when the internet came along, most of the computers that he used were not on the internet and also had electroshock fittings put onto the hard drive so that all the data could be erased. Now, so this was a level of attention to security and detail I'd never come across before. And it was to do with his background and to do with who he'd worked with and who he was working with. And he explained to me, for example, with his business, this trading of paper, that the Ford Motor Company in England, who were at the time one of his clients, and there were several others, made more money from what he did for them than they did from making cars. And so it dawned on me, or I took the decision, that the entire system was sick. And it was. And he would fill me in on other details. We were driving around London at one point, and he would point out these buildings, and he would say, "The judges that you know about?" He said, "Yeah, that's where all the dungeons are that they go to get beat up." I went, "Oh." I mean, I'm green as grass at this time. It's very embarrassing. You get to your 30s. I don't know what happened to you. You think, "Oh, I kind of know how the world works." I didn't have a clue. We went past a building one day. This would be about 1998. This taps into the birth certificate stuff, right? Long time ago. So we're talking, 25 years ago? We drive past this miserable, they're all miserable, aren't they? Architecturally bereft buildings, like a concrete bunker. And it was quite large. And he said, "Look, that's a government building." I said, how interesting, or whatever I said. He said, "Do you know what they do in there?" I said, "No." He said, "Well, I'll tell you." He said, "All the babies that are born in this part of the county," wherever it was, he said, "when they're born, the birth certificates come into this centre." I said, "Oh, right." He said, "Yeah, and then this record of all the babies that are being born goes to the Treasury." I said, "What?" He said, "Yeah, it goes to the Treasury. They're very keen to know about this." I said, "Why is that?" He said, "Because what they will do, they look at this baby, which is a piece of paper, and they make an estimation of how much tax that individual is likely to pay over the course of their lifetime. They come up with a figure. They then go off and borrow money on the markets, or really, the markets are effectively the large private banking central bank cartel, which is what it is, at interest, putting up the life of the baby as surety for the loan." This is 25 years ago. I knew this stuff. Not in great detail. Do you need to know it in great detail? I think the idea is to just be outraged by it. And don't forget that. Never let go of the outrage. It's absolutely off the charts appalling. And of course, it's highly indicative of the way that they view us in so many ways. And that's exactly replicated in so many other areas of the way that we are treated, if you see what I mean. So I said, I'm really not happy about that. He said, "I'm very unhappy about it." And I found out later on that he was basically waging almost like a one-man war against the British government. And he was extremely astute with regards to legal processes, the hiring or not hiring of barristers and silks, things that were a completely alien world to me. I'd come from a marketing background. I'd been on a telephone trying to sell photocopies or something like that. Just thinking, well, this is how you get on in the world. No, you don't. You don't get on in the world doing that. Or you do only up to a certain ceiling. So it was an astonishing period. It was very disorienting. And at the time, and maybe many of you have experienced this since, in terms of bumping into information, it was not possible for me to talk to other people about this. Time for a glass of water. Listen to me talk. You don't know that it's gin either. It is water, by the way. So all of this information keeps coming in from him about what they'd done to this country during the war. And then I found out that many of his family had been killed during the war and that this had bitten deep with him, that his mother was injured from military service and that they'd also seized some of the family's property in London and never given it back for the war effort in 1943 or something. He was a very angry man. You wouldn't have known it from his demeanour, but it was a righteous anger with what had been done to him. The upshot of it was that we ended up in court over a project that we were doing, which I'm also not going to go into detail because it's even more embarrassing than what I've talked about. But it was a noble effort, it certainly was on my part, to relieve huge numbers of people in the UK from debt. Isn't that so naive? But at the time, I thought this was the greatest idea since, sliced chips or whatever is a really great idea. Fried chips. I was completely taken up with it. And my enthusiasm for it was used by him quite cynically. I realised afterwards, in the years afterwards, because we ended up going to court. But it wasn't we. He was a primary defendant. He just didn't bother to turn up. This disconcerted me beyond belief. And during the court case about these inquiries into things, although you've only got my word to go on about this, the judge lied at least twice about things that only I would have known about. He was seeking to make out that I was an evil sort of guy who'd plundered tons of money out of this particular situation, which was completely untrue. Because I had pointed out to them that they had access to all my accounts. They'd shut them down. They denied me legal aid 3 or 4 times. I got fed up of applying for it. And of course, I didn't know what was going on. And when I went into the court, it was kind of overwhelming and also slightly embarrassing. I felt very immature. I was 40 years of age at the time and really totally out of my depth. Absolutely bewildering beyond belief. And I realized that they were all talking a secret language very quickly and that the whole purpose of it was just a shakedown for them to get as much money back into the court. They said as much, basically. And it struck me as being very odd. And during the course of this, I would call him and say, "You're not in court, are you?" He said, "Oh, no, I'm not coming." I said, "Why?" He said, "The charges aren't heavy enough." Later on, I met him again at Liverpool Street Station. It was a good place for us to meet. I said, "I'm bewildered. What are you talking about?" He said, they put charges in at a certain level, which stopped me bringing out the information that I've got. He had evidence, right, showing high-scale corruption within the entire government circles, and they knew he had it. So they laid in a charge sufficient that any evidence he brought of the nature that he wanted to get into court would be inadmissible. It wasn't relevant to the case. They were just seeking to disturb him with what he did. All of this cat and mouse game, unbelievable. And one day I'm with him, and he throws me a report on DTI letterhead, the Department of Trade and Industry. I don't know if it still goes. They probably changed their name or something. And I said, it was all about him. I said, "What's this?" He said, "Oh, this is a report that they've filed on me." I said, "Oh, how did you get it?" He said, "Oh, I have people working for me that work in the DTI." I'm serious. Now, I went, I'm kind of out of my depth here with this stuff. It was very deadly serious stuff. I can't say I loved the guy. I was astounded by the information that he supplied. It all turned out to be true in subsequent years because the information became available on the internet for us to plow through this stuff and to, really look at these things. So I went off and checked many, many things to do just that. And it was great because I went, all that stuff I've been talking and thinking that everybody's told me I'm mad about. I'm not mad. I didn't think I was mad because I'd seen so much evidence. One other thing. I'll give you a Rothschild story from him. Back in I think it's the late 80s, there was a Rothschild called David de Rothschild, racing car driver, very good apparently, and the scion of the clan. Is this going to get me a knock at the door? I don't think so. It'll probably be dismissed. Now, if you go and look him up, you'll find that he died in a hotel room in Paris. Apparently hung himself off the proverbial shower and curtain rail. So this is the conspiracy section of my communications so far today, okay? So this is just an outline of a story that I received, and it may or may not be true. You'll have to make of it what you will. But the background that this gentleman gave me about him was this. He said that he'd been in touch with him for years, and the background was this. The 60s, the 1960s, the groovy, swinging 60s, which I don't know a great deal about because I was a toddler up north, and so was not really included in the swinging 60s, which was all happening to teenagers and the rest down in London, etc. Because we were northerners, it took a long time for us to catch on, to things like that. We were in no rush for that sort of thing. And many of these leading families, and by the way, whenever we met, he would always refer to them as the families. The families, that there are these families. This wasn't written down anyway. Later on, you find out, you read Fritz Springmeier and these other things. You learn about these families, these 13 families or whatever they are, in charge of most of these things, okay? It all panned out. But at the time, the only source of information I had for that was this man and his newsletters. But it all held together so well. Anyway, most of the families had a lot of problems with their children that were growing up in the 60s because they became infused with the mood of the times. And they felt that the family businesses, which are effectively parasitical plundering groups, that's really what they are. There's no other way to describe it. This is long-term, centuries-old, organized, parasitical plunder. They began to look on the family concerns and decide that these things were not so good after all, at least according to the report I heard, and that David was amongst them and had plans to basically transform the workings of their business. They still would have been very effective, but not along the lines of this, that, and the other. And for this reason, for whatever reason, he had to go, and he wasn't the only one. So things are never quite as straightforward necessarily as we might think they are. I suspect there's masses of disagreement over there, wherever over there is, on the other side. Otherwise, things would have happened against us much more rapidly, I suspect, over the past 200 or 300 years. And they don't have unlimited power. Of course, I think we could say that it looks as though they're getting pretty close to it right now, doesn't it? It feels it because of this technological, the technocratic attack on us. Anyway, I've talked for a wee while. You know what I'm going to do? I'm going to put a record on. I probably shouldn't do this. I'll probably get knocked from the music police. They haven't formed that division yet, have they? And this is because, just to let you know, I've been prepping everything, but breaks and stuff, I just didn't even have a chance to do this, even though the last 4 or 5 days that I've been really trying to do this. And I had to commit to this date, just to let you know. You go, well, you couldn't even get it ready in time. Well, no, I've got quite a few things to do. And what happened is that the breaks, I just couldn't get them done. Had I not committed to this date, this show would never have happened, ever. I don't think I would have ever got off my rear end and got started with this. So there we go. Let me just stick something on. What have we got? Do we have a pretty tune? I quite like this one. And, oh no, not that one. Oh, is it that one? No, which was the one that I wanted? Oh, yeah, we'll put this on. Let's have a little tune. And this runs for about 2 or 3 minutes. I'll be back after this one.
New York City, and all the girls don't look so pretty, and you can't find a job, and you're looking like a slob. Go west, realize your dreams. Go west, eat pork and beans. You're looking like a slob. Wagons home. It's all the rage. west. Get a living wage, go west. Wagons haul. Way out west, they got the best, they got everything you need. Hollywood is looking good, your future's guaranteed. So climb on board, don't miss this chance. Cowboys do a buckwing dance. It's entertaining, it's never raining. You don't need no more explaining. Go west, realize your dreams. Go west, eat pork and beans. Go west. Wagons home, yeah. Go west, it's all the rage. Go west, get a living wage. Go west. Wagons home. Now way out west, you can build a little nest, a little condo by the sea. You can sit in the shade, a Mexican maid will clean up quietly. So get that line, get it straight, fly right through that Golden Gate. Let's be specific, let's hit the Pacific. Surfing, it's terrific. Go west, realize your dreams. Go west, eat pork and beans. Go west. Wagons home, yeah. Go west, it's all the rage. Go west, get a living wage. Go west. Wagons home, go west. Wagons home.
Go west. And maybe we're all going to have to go even further west, which we can't, can we? The migrations of our people. Look how I switched tack there. Don't worry, I'll come back to banking in a bit, because there's still a few more bits to mention about that. But the migrations of our people have been north and west for quite a few centuries now. And I guess the last great big westward movement was when we all decided, or our forefathers decided, to go to America and become cowboys, which wasn't such a bad choice at the time, and turned out to be produced a spectacular event called America, with all of the goods, the highs and the lows and the bads, etc. But can we go further west? We'd end up going to the Pacific, I suppose, and seeing as how they're burning Hawaii down with their advanced technology, ho, 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 there's probably nowhere left for us to go there either. So I think that although this sounds a bit silly, because there is no further west to go to, and because our people have moved northwards and westwards for a long time, this is why there's this kind of final accounting type moment. Wherever our people have gone, and you're only getting my spin on it, right, because that's the only one I can give you, but wherever people have gone, they have planted crops, built civilizations, brought law and order. They've also done some bad things, and colonialism was a big mistake, and all this, that, and the other. But overall, a great deal of positives have come from it, and we weren't alive at the time. It's so easy for us to judge people of the past, just as we will be judged. Actually, we might not, because there might not be anybody left, right? Well, we'd love to have judged you, but we never got born, you see, because you're all, whatever. But we will be judged by things, and I suppose some of us feel that, not maybe as a conscious thought, but in terms of wanting to crack on, and get to grips with what's going on in the world. So back to this money thing, just briefly, then we're going to move on to some other stuff, just for now. This body of knowledge with money that I acquired from this guy, and by 2002, I didn't see him anymore, and I had a report of his death. I think he died about 2011. I don't know why. I'd lost complete contact with him, and I'd thought I wasn't very happy with him, let's put it that way, at the end. But time mellows all things, and even recently, like when I discovered these papers the other day, not that I was looking for them, I was actually supposed to be tidying things up. I have a big problem with that. I just thought it would be very useful to have him here to talk about these things. But I've given you this second-hand account, really, from a distance. It might have proved useful, I don't know, but it might give you an indication about why I'm here doing this. Everybody's got a different path into this thing. So mine's through finance, and for years I used to go around talking to people. I said, I'm not a banker, because I'm not. Do you like bankers? Well, not really, no. The vast majority of people, of course, that work in the banking industry are not part of these things. But banks, the whole idea of the way that the bank is structured is not good. It's not good at all. And I'll keep hopping into little reports on and off throughout the shows as they develop and build, with little vignettes and little comments about these things, both historic, which I think are important, and in the here and now, today. Here's an interesting little pointer, or an interesting little fact with regards, cough, cough, to the origins of the Bank of England and the origins of the Federal Reserve. They've both got something in common. The Federal Reserve, of course, was passed into legislation, or I don't know, a toilet bowl, whatever you want to call it, December 1913. I think it was 1913, wasn't it? Just before the onset of World War I. And it was about 3 or 4 days before Christmas. And when it was passed or read and approved, whatever the process is, so forgive me, American colleagues, if I'm mullering this, but when that happened, no one was there. No one. It was practically empty. That is, the great mass, the great body of political lawmakers and advisors, etc., were not even present for this momentous decision to gift America with a flexible money supply, which I know the Americans have loved ever since. We were cursed with one of these things a little bit earlier, in 1694. So actually next year will be the what? Is it 330th? 330 years of the old tart of Threadneedle Street, right? And so the vote for that was cast in August of 1694. Now guess what? In 1694, nearly all the political class in England were farmers, because practically everybody was a farmer or connected to farming, because if you weren't going to be eating pretty soon. I mean, there was one point, I think a bit earlier in our history, when it took the effort of 20 men to feed 24. So effectively 80% of the workforce of England was involved in the agricultural industry because it needed to be. Things had moved on a bit by then, 1694, but still, most of them had to go in because it was the time of the harvest. They had to go and pick their crops, otherwise things were going to get really bad. So there was no one, hardly anybody there then, too. Well, I never. Isn't that shocking, eh? You see a pattern here? You ought to. I mean, it's not much of a pattern, but I think it's good enough for anybody that's actually thought about it. So these decisions to burden us with this private, parasitical spivs club, that's what it is, right, were taken really without the the approval, and probably in many cases even the knowledge, the detailed knowledge necessary, of those lawmakers and representatives of the people at the time. It's quite a major thing. Because of what I learnt, and because of what I was taught, and because of what I subsequently learnt, I don't look favourably on the way the bank operates. Anyway, after I'd lost contact with this guy in 2002 or 3 or whatever it was, I was like a dog with a bone, getting all sorts of books on economic systems and how they had or had not worked and what had stopped them. Now, unbeknownst to most people today, I mean, there's a goodly number that do know about these things, but the great majority of people do not know of these things, and certainly the powers that should not be are not really going to go out of their way to inform them. There have been, and there are to this day, because we could mimic them, financial structures that would completely annihilate the ability for the central bank to predate on the people. So you can imagine they're not very interested in that. And you say, well, what power have they got? Well, they're entrenched. It's an entrenched power. This is my view of it. And you have a political class now that is completely corrupted and drawn into that sphere. And they operate a double act, basically. You've got these actors called politicians. You've had them your entire life. And they stand out front and talk nonsense about the economy. All of it's manure. The reason why I say that in such a sort of emphatic way is to sort of drive the point across, because none of them ever, that I can recall, have ever talked about the operations of the central bank. There's always this brouhaha in the press when a new governor of the Bank of England is about to be appointed, or the head of the Federal Reserve. Why? They've never explained to people how it works. I ask people this a lot. I say, you went to school? Most people still say yes. Very soon, I suspect, it won't be as many yeses as we've had. I said, so you learned English and maths? Yeah. Okay, great. Did they teach you about banking? Oh, no. Not even basics about banking. Did they teach you how money is created? No. Where it comes from? No. Who owns the Bank of England? I've run this thing often with people. I've said to people in pubs, have you got any shares in the Bank of England? And they go, no. And then they'll ask me, do you have shares? I said, oh, no. I said, we're not allowed them. They said, and then people have said to me, what, you can have shares in the Bank of England? I said, well, someone does. I used to call them up, by the way, the Bank of England, this sort of perverse, pointless, fatuous exercise. This is just after this court case thing, because I was really quite cross. And but I would call them in a very polite way and say, oh, I just wondered if I could, where would I get a list of the shareholders of the Bank of England? And they said, well, we don't give that information out, sir. I said, but there are shareholders, aren't there? They said, well, we don't give that information out. I said, well, you kind of already have, I tried 3 or 4 times, but they don't do it. I didn't expect to get anywhere. It was just a thing that I wanted to do. Maybe you could get it now. I mean, for years, the British government have said that, oh, no, we own the Bank of England. They knocked out some paper in 1948. I can't remember the name of it. It's all complete blather and nonsense. What's the point of any economic report? We have no idea what's going on if the basis of the measurement of that report, i.e. money, is skew with all over the shop and no one really knows or talks about how it works. There's a central banker, or there's a banker, banking advisor. I'll dig him up, actually. I don't mean literally. He's still alive. He, over here, a man with a German surname, very good. He's actually made a couple of good speeches in the EU about this, but then they get buried again. The answer's right there, but we can't apply it, because if we apply it, the spivs are out of business. It kills the spiv business. Now, if you don't know what a spiv is, if you're in America, it's a reprehensible crook. They used to sort of inhabit racetracks and give you false tips over here, and they'd be dodgy, and they'd have too much Brill cream in their hair. This is the archetypical picture of them. And they'd smoke too many cigarettes and talk through the side of their mouth like that, and everything's a bit of a deal, you know what I mean? And things like that. So they were known as, untrustworthy cads, shocking types, not good. And that's really the characteristic that we're dealing with. It's like, it's large scale. It's not without its brains, obviously not. They're nothing if not clever, the great merchants of the earth, as the Bible refers to them as, rightly so. And of course, everything it appears right now is to be sucked into their orbit. We are to be swallowed up by them. But we're here, well, I'm here to talk about that and all those sorts of things, and maybe you are too. So we'll touch upon these things. They're all interconnected. But if you don't know where your money comes from and how it works, or why it has different purchasing power from year to year to year, i.e. less, and that's always occurred, you're kind of at a loss to make really serious economic plans. If you look at the channel, I always remember Gordon Brown, unfortunately. Oh, God, his image just shot into my head. You wouldn't wish that on anybody, would you? So about 20 years ago, the Chancellor of the Exchequer, sounds marvellous, doesn't it? I wouldn't mind chancelling some excheques. He sold a lot of gold for a very bad price at the time. And everybody said, why has he done that? Well, some story was put out in the press, but my take on it is he got his orders. There's a politician over here called, I don't like any of these guys, frankly, to be quite honest, but there's a guy called Michael Portillo. He's had a series about railway. Probably did get that beep. Hang on, let me de-beep eyes. There's nothing worse than a beep, is there? which is the most powerful. It's not even debatable, frankly. It's not. It's not. You will have noticed, of course, there's always plenty of money for wars and crap and things that we don't need. There's no money for sorting out the people. The bank doesn't exist to serve you. You exist to serve the economy. The news cycle, of course, is infused with this rot. Everybody's being gaslit all the time. Oh, this, oh, that. Of course, it has been bad recently because they're in full-on destruction mode. That's what they're doing. They're morphing and sucking all your purchasing power out by design. You don't have to be a genius to see this, but you do at least have to think about it, and I suspect most of you here do think about it, which is great. But the whole thing is an orchestrated effort to diminish and reduce your purchasing power. And when you've got usury floating around, and you usually do, sorry, old dad jokes, right? They're the best, actually. You're always going to get that. Effectively, the levelling of interest, and I'm sorry if I'm sorry, it's one of these things of teaching granny to suck eggs. We need to look into that as well, because my grandma never sucked them. But whenever you've got it floating around, it just does one thing. It'll do it quick or it'll do it gradually, but it'll do it. It drives ever more purchasing power into ever fewer hands. That's what it's designed to do. That's what it always does. And of course, the argument has been, well, you've got to let the private bankers make a profit. To which I would say, no, you do not. Why? Why should they make a profit? At all. Well, you want to have competitive services in banking. We don't need them. Who says we need them? We don't need any of these things. The frame of thinking that most people have, understandably, has been moulded by consuming mass media for their entire lives. I include me. I didn't consume too much of it. I was busy off, doing something else. I can't quite remember what it was, but it seemed to take a long time anyway. But it's understandable why people would have the view that they do of how things work in this particular way. How to get rid of it. So this is actually working out all right for me. It might not be working out for you, but I'm getting clear about what I'm talking about today. So we're in the early 2000s. I start looking at lots of solutions to this. You find that they've existed, that people have applied them. And in nearly all cases, whenever they have, the scheme, the restructuring has been obliterated by the forces of the other side. How have they been able to do it? Well, in many cases, they're hirelings and underlings, the political class, who they've got by the short and curlies. They just tell them to shut these things down. Otherwise, I'll give you an example. I talked about this before a couple of years ago, but if you've not heard it, it's a very useful one. You will recall or will be aware of the great crash of Wall Street in 1929. And it was a big deal, and it was organised. It wasn't accidental. Because the people that organised it are also the same people that own the newspapers then and since then, and have made sure that you've absorbed a manure story about it. And even if you haven't, you know that you're surrounded by a lot of people that have, or were. Churchill, by the way, escaped the wrath of that. He had some pals who told him to get all his money out. Good lad, Churchill. Not. But he got all his money out, and pity for the poor people, eh? Yeah, what a pity. Never mind. So, huge numbers of people were destroyed. It was an appalling situation, but it was intended. It was by design. So the world is in what's called a depression, and this is where money has been inflated, then loans are withdrawn or stopped, and there's a crash and no one can meet all their payments, and so the prices of things plummet so that people can meet the payments and blah, 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 blah. Particularly the prices of stock. And if you want to examine all that forever and a day, you can. But I would suggest it's not worth it, because this entire system is basically like a large casino where you walk in and are induced to think that, if you work hard, you'll get on well. And many people do okay. They can't have everybody being smashed to bits. Some people do fantastically, right? But that's courtesy of the privilege extended to it by the house. The minute you start to progress a little bit too much, not just in the realm of finance, but anywhere in terms of influence or whatever, you'll feel a squeeze coming on. They don't want any of that. We don't want any of these bright working class lads from all over the place sorting themselves out. Now, you might say this is hogwash, Paul. Maybe you do. Maybe certain people, of course, are still stimulated by the idea of making millions of pounds. Maybe I am. I don't really want to make it. I just like to someone drop it off. But not because I think it's going to solve my problems, although, of course, it is going to do that for now. But long term, it won't do anything of the sort. It will not do anything of the sort. The actual system itself is a corrosive type of, what have I said in the past? The type of money that we use is cancerous. And it literally is. The analogy is almost perfect. Leukemia is a terrible form of cancer, which is cancer of the blood. And as you know, the blood is transported and moves around the entire body, taking away waste products and feeding cells with energy and whatever it needs to do. That's the limit of my knowledge about it. If the transport mechanism, the blood, is cancerous, it infects everything. It's a colossally challenging sort of disease, and a very unfortunate one for those people that get it. Well, we've got cancer of the money, because the money that you have been using all your life moves around carrying interest, all of it, or servicing some business that's carrying a debt. So money is issued as a credit. We're not even using real money. It's issued as a credit. It carries interest. That interest is levied on the expanded money supply, and it just gets hoovered back into these ever fewer hands that I've talked about. And it affects everything. It affects business planning, subtly but steadily and relentlessly. It's created a culture of vastly complicated accounts departments having to work this out. Completely tiresome and ultimately pointless task. Not necessary at all. Because we have been trained to think, and we do think this way, that we have to make money to get on. And I'm afraid, of course, right now we do. We've been inducted into the religion of Mammon. Mammon, the god of money. We've been inducted to it, whether you like it or not, because everybody else is inducted into it and has been taken into it. Except there have been examples where people have... So here's one. Let's get back to 1929. This depression that had occurred, I don't know, I'm going to finish this thing and then I'll play another little track or something in a little while. I'm just keeping an eye on the clock. Got to get used to a few things that I didn't have to get used to before. This vast depression affected everywhere. Affected England, of course, and it affected Europe, and it affected people in Austria. And in Austria, there is a town called Würgl, probably still there today, spelt W-O with that little accent thing over the top that I don't know what it's called, 2 dots or something, R-G-L, Würgl. And there was a mayor in Würgl, referred to in documents from some very bright spark analysts at the Chicago School of Economics in the early 1930s, and I've forgotten his name. And they referred to him as the mayor with the very long name, because they couldn't write it down all the time. But his very long name was Unter Guggenberger, which is very long, isn't it? It's quite nice. Unter, what does that mean? Under, I don't know. Under the Guggenberger, whatever, forget all that. Anyway, Guggenberger was a mayor, and he had a town, and I can't remember how many people lived there. A small town, and he was the mayor of it, and things were in a ruin. There were all these families destitute and unemployed. Unemployment was very high. He needed 2 sewers laying in the main street because things were getting out of hand on that department too. And generally there was just the overall, languid, disaffected, can't get anything doneness because we're in a depression. Unter Guggenberger had been studying a German man, who had left Germany in his early years, relatively, gone to Argentina, become a very successful beef farmer, if that's the right phrase, a raiser of livestock. And Argentinian beef is supposed to be fantastic. I've never been and eaten it. Of course, I know Theta Gruntbird would be distressed beyond belief to know that we want to do that, but steak is good for you. And, that's why God made cows. So, anyway, at least that's my implausible argument for the whole thing. Gessel went down to Argentina, became very successful at this, and had a lot of time on his hands because he was being so successful. He'd got it very well organized, making plenty of money, and was a good guy. And he began to study the nature of money. And he came up with a very interesting idea. He's not the only one. We had people in England coming up with massively interesting ideas around this time, nearly all of which work, and which most of us don't know about. Anyway, Gessel made this observation. He said, I'll use an example of someone who's got a chicken farm and is selling eggs. Now, I don't know how long it takes for eggs to stop being eggs. They get created. Thank you, lady hen, laying an egg every day or whatever you're doing. And they'll stay an edible egg for what, 5 weeks? Let's call it a month. I don't know what it is. It could be longer, it could be shorter. Maybe there are some chicken farmers out there who know these things backwards. It's not critical. We'll just say it's a month. And so you need to sell your eggs whilst they're still eggs. And he said, the person that's holding the money has got an unfair advantage in the exchange. They're holding money, and they can wait as long as they possibly can to drive the price down on this farmer, who then has to sell at the lowest possible price before what he calls eggs turns into rotten eggs, i.e. of no use to anybody. All he can do is throw them, at the local tax collectors or whatever he's going to do. He said, I'm going to design a type of money that rots like the eggs do, which is interesting. How we would handle it these days, well, I guess you might be able to do it digitally, what I'm about to say, but I love the idea. I like this sort of hands-on, tactile approach. What he did was he designed a note, and on the back of it, it had 50 squares, maybe 52, corresponding to each week of the year. And actually, I've jumped a bit. Let's jump over to, this is what Guggenberger did. Guggenberger had studied Gessel's idea. What Gessel was talking about is a type of money that lost its purchasing power in a controlled way. And he called it demurrage, which is a bit of a mouthful. To demur means to stand down, to give way to, right? Or you are demure, which means you're incredibly, accommodating. So Guggenberger designed this banknote, the Virgil, whatever they called it. And on the back of this note, he put these 50 squares. And what you had to do, every Saturday, you had to go along, and you had to put a stamp on the back of each one, on each square. And if you didn't, it was deemed to be not up to par. And so what he does, he takes 14,000 Austrian shillings of his own money, puts it in a safe. He pulls all these workmen in who've got nothing to do. He said, I need some sewers laying, lads. They go, all right, great, you haven't got any money. He goes, no, this is true, I don't have the sort of money that you're used to, but I've got this. And he shows them the note, and of course they're not particularly interested. And he explains to them how it works. He said, this will be legal tender within the town, and all you have to do is make sure that you go along to the post office by lunchtime every Saturday, make sure the stamps are on the back, Otherwise, the people that are receiving it are probably they're going to have to put more stamps on because you've given them a note that's got all these squares empty on it, okay? Because there's nothing else to do, they accept it, and off they go with these notes. So the results are spectacular. Right there, mind-blowingly spectacular. Within 6 months, all these sewers have been laid. The whole nature of the way that people think about buying and selling goods and services changes. House design changes because of it. Why? Because people don't want their money. They don't want money. They want good stuff that lasts. The quality of workmanship goes up. When you buy a table, you don't want to have to go through all this palaver of sticking stamps on again. You want to buy a table that's going to last 40 years. So you get people to start building them. It changes the design ethic. You will be aware, of course, that we live in a world which is just consumable crap, right? Because we've got to keep the economy going. It's a bizarre, aberrated form of behavior that we've entered into. Absolutely mad. And all because of interest. It's so subtle that it's changed our operating system for how we behave, what we think is important. And so these sewers get laid. Not only that, when they got surplus money, they prepaid their taxes 2 years in advance. The first and only time this has ever happened. Everybody was employed within 3 to 6 months. The soup kitchens disappeared. They started building bigger and better houses with large storage areas because when they went to buy potatoes, they wanted to buy loads of them today and store them effectively. So it changed house design or the thinking, and it would have continued to change. All of these things. It's what we would call wholesome. There's something very appealing about this. It's saying the value doesn't lie in these pieces of paper, you chump, which it doesn't. The bankers want you to think that, and of course they've been very successful at doing it. It lies in these cabbages and these chairs and this car that you want to buy. If you go there to this day, there's a bridge there, and there's a plaque on it. I've never been, but I've seen photographs of it. And there's a plaque on this bridge, and it says, "This is the bridge that we built with our own money." They just built it. They made up their own money, and it just worked. Now, of course, the story doesn't end well, does it? Because if it did, we'd have all been doing something like this for most of our lives, because this was 1932 or 1933 that he brought this about. And we'd have been doing this. We'd have all been licking stamps all our life, going, "Oh, I've run out of stamps for the back of my £5 note." It's quite funny, really. What happened? Down the valley, and when I say the valley, maybe it's 20, 30, 40 miles away or whatever, there's another town suffering exactly the same problems that Virgil suffered. And the mayor hears of Guggenberger's effective plan, and he comes to see him. They have a chat, and he takes him through what he did and how he introduced it in stages and got everybody behind it. And he said, if you've got anybody in your town that's doubtful, send them to come up here and they can talk to my workmen, and they'll tell you exactly how this has transformed things, how it's changed things. It's given the people their morale back. Ooh, you don't want that. That's dangerous too. So buoyancy has come back into the breasts of and hearts of the men and women. So he said, "Okay, well, we do it." He said, "Do you think if we do it, we could also trade up and down the valley here?" He said, "Yeah, why not?" So he comes up with that. He uses the same system, the same approach, with exactly the same results. Probably even greater, maybe, if they're intertrading up and down the valley. I know this is simplistic stuff, and of course we say, no, the world is far more complicated than that, but the principle is what we're trying to drive at here. Well, word of this goes around, and there's a meeting of all the mayors of Austria in Vienna. Probably was Vienna. I don't know anywhere else, and I assume it would have been Vienna. This is 1933, at the height of the Depression. And Guggenberger is called up to make a presentation. There's about 130 mayors there, one from every canton or district, whatever they're called. And he goes through the whole thing, and the other mayor backs him up, and everybody goes, "This is absolutely fantastic. We love this. This is brilliant. We're all going to do it." Wow. We're all going to do it, they say. And Austria is going to go to the moon and back in three weeks, which it would. Right? It did do a little bit later. We'll come back to that. We'll come over to that, maybe not today. So, off they go. A few days later, knock, 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 on the door of the Prime Minister of Austria, a representative from the international Spivs club known as Central Banks. And he turns up and he says, "We've heard about this scheme that you're considering doing. Yeah, you will not be doing this scheme. We don't want you to do this." He said, "But it works." He said, "It don't work for us, basically. If you do that, we'll crash the Austrian shilling on all the world's exchanges, and your career will be over, and we'll also scandalize you, and we'll do everything that we can to ensure that you live a miserable, rotten life for the rest of your days." So it never happened. You have to bear in mind that the solutions that we think and we see on a sheet of paper, applying them in the real world, bumps into this dark force. This force that has now acquired so much power that it feels entitled to have it all the time. All the time. And will and has and does anything and everything to stave it off, including organizing all the wars, including destroying our people in all the wars, because we're not in charge of our monetary system. So this is why I often say, and I've talked about this longer than I thought I would. I've got lots of other things to cover, actually. But this is why I tend to say that until we've found a way, and I don't know exactly what that way is, it's the practical hurdle of doing it. It's not the design. Until we find a way to transform the way that the central bank operates, realistically, we are going to suffer and face hardship in every other area. Because this force is the string that controls all these other areas. The media is pounding garbage into the heads and hearts of our kith and kin 24/7 and has been doing it for decades. How do you stop it? Well, I'm trying to stop it by doing this wee little acorn of a radio thing, and there are many other good people doing exactly the same thing, and we need to keep doing these things because it keeps our morale up. If you look up the word demoralize, I think it means to live without any hope for a positive future. And you could say quite simply that that has been the condition for most people in England and no doubt America and the rest of the world, specifically over the last 3 years or so, whilst we've realised, some of us, of course, have realised that the phrase lying politicians is not just a euphemism. It's literally now a provable fact. It's a truth. And we've also seen that we have no voice from them. The English in the United Kingdom, in Britain, have no voice. We haven't had one for ages. We don't have a voice. We don't have a say in the outcome of our own lives. We need to find that, don't we? We do need to find that voice. So these things knock into every other topic area. And I think there are other factors as important as the monetary thing. But in the pragmatic realm, I'm currently at that point where I'm thinking, how are we to overcome this if we don't sort it out? You know, how are we going to overcome it? Okay, I'm going to play you a little song now because I need a little break, and I'll just go and have a look at the chats and everything, and then we'll decide what we do. What's time? We're just coming up to about 12 minutes past 8 of an evening, and that hour's flown by. We'll play a little song. How about that? A little instrumental song. And who's playing it? Oh, yeah. Which one should I play? I've got two versions. This is a cover of something. Some of you will know it. I'm not even going to name it, actually. But these are recordings. I quite like it. The long one, it's only longer by 26 seconds. Let's take a 2-minute break. We'll listen to this. Here we go. Isn't that sweet? It's a bit more than that. Who was the guitarist on that? Many of you will know that song, so I don't even need to name it. And if you don't, send your answers on a postcard, please, to P.O. Box. And whoever gets the right answer will get a nice box of toffees. I must get something going with the toffees. The toffees of truth, eh? Has it got a ring to it? Probably not. No, it hasn't. That was... Who was playing the guitar there? Let's have a look. Ooh, I don't know. Hang on just a minute. Oh, somebody called Gino Fillion. You'll find it on YouTube. Gino, Gino, surname Fillion, Fillion, I think. Wonderful recording of a wonderful song. Some 50 years ago. Very haunting in many ways. Celtic, of course. Brilliant. Absolutely brilliant. I grew up listening to that and other songs by those people for years. I'll be less coy as we go along and I find my footing, but for now, that'll do. Okay, now, I just happened to be able to catch a glimpse over at Rumble, and this is also going out on Odyssey, so this is just... I'm not tending to look at Odyssey as much. I love you all at Odyssey. And I decided to try and have a go at everything. As I said, we're going out on 4 different streams here. We're streaming out on the audio player over the website. We're going out on Rumble. We're going out on Odyssey. And we also have another streamer going to Speak Free Radio. We're picking it up on a simulcast, which is great. And I've also seen in the Rumble chat... Oh, gosh, look at that. Can't control myself. I'm getting so excited. I've seen a couple of comments regarding where it's been streamed elsewhere by Paul, who knows who I'm referring to. Paul, thank you very much for doing that. So it's going out to the Radio Ranch group in Jitsi and FCC. Wonderful. So, and on Global Voice Network. So everybody that's hearing me over there, welcome. And Paul, if you've got some numbers afterwards, that'd be great to know, because obviously we need to get millions of people listening to things like this, he said, vainly. Question in the Rumble chat, or a point, which is good because you give me an intro to kick off. And I'm sorry if I've not been looking at it. I'm just the first show. I'm just finding my feet, okay? I had a very cushy job when I was with Andy. He would set the whole thing up and he just asked me a question. I just used to run off at the mouth. We'll get there as well. I mean, I can talk a bit, but that kind of thing. So Exo writes this. Great German name. I'm assuming you're referring to Unter Guggenberger. Yes, it's fantastic. It's the sort of name you kind of don't want to forget, really. It's that good. The mayor with the very long name will do as well. He says, Paul, can you maybe address what it is historically and culturally about the German civilization that has made them a target for wiping out in the last few centuries? Well, that's a biggie. That's going to take us into all sorts of other historical things, isn't it? But I'll tell you what we should touch upon here lightly, although I'm going to return to this one a lot, is one of the underpinning causes for what we refer to as World War II. I think what we have to really refer to it is as one big war, ridiculously, from 1914 to 1945. And we still live to this day in the shadow of that because of the lies told about it. You're getting my take on it. You may not agree. Okay, I understand that. But going back to the early 2000s when I started studying things, right? Because it's all interlinked. It drew me into looking at these solutions, and you find out that National Socialist Germany did something in the 1930s that was astonishing. Now, there is a lot of people that will say, and they're probably right, that they were being funded, that the National Socialist Party was being funded heavily by American industry, and it was. Henry Ford invested. So did a lot of other people. I'm not going to go into it today because it's a massive topic, and we'll touch on it in little bits. It's probably best if we touch on it in little bite-sized bits and kind of digest it as we go. But there were people from the enemy. Everybody was profiting from Germany once they got up and running. Now, people will use the argument to say that, they received money from elsewhere, so this invalidates what they did. No, it doesn't. Not in my view. Not in my view. Anybody that knows the condition of the German people in the 1920s, and it's a sordid, wretched affair, you will, of course, be aware of the wheelbarrows of money for the hyperinflation. Or you run out of adjectives to describe this thing. A loaf of bread, 8 million marks or something, or whatever it was. It all becomes meaningless, you see. And I suspect that was a great big testbed experiment to see how people reacted under massive, high-scale inflationary things. That you'll get some other peddled thing, but these things are organised. It's organised every single time. Just like the central bank digital currencies are. Oh, they're going to make our life so easy. The Germans did something that was absolutely appalling to the international bankers. They did something similar to what Unter Guggenberger had done. They basically cut them out. They were just cut out. If you're a pragmatic person, you go, why do we need you? Why do I need your tokens that you're making up with your printing press and all your promises when we could just do it directly and save a fortune, and we could actually thrive because we could produce more food and more cars and more motorways and more trains, and we could organize better, and we could spend more money on culture and beauty and art and all of these things, and we could put up better buildings that would inspire people and lift their hearts to the heavens. What about that as a thought? Well, that's exactly a key part of what they were doing. Well, the international bankers don't take kindly to this sort of thing. Of course, the German situation is massively complex. There are so many different aspects to it that feed into it. There is a book called Red Symphony, which, if you've just heard of it now for the first time, maybe look it up. In fact, what I will seek to do as I build up a head of steam with this is some of the documents that I reference will make available in the Telegram group, as long as we keep on using Telegram before that becomes spy agency number one. It's only a matter of time, everybody, right, with all of these things. I'll try and make some of these documents available. But Churchill, the admirable, ho, 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 please take that with a pinch of salt, revealed something. Now, I can't remember when he revealed it. It may have been in the 30s. And I'm paraphrasing from memory. He said something like this: Germany's great sin was to deny the international markets their cut of the profits. This is a sin, right? The market makers, the arrangers of paperwork in the world, are entitled to live off your back, according to Churchill. And he should know, because he did. He did. So I'm maybe one of the very few Englishmen who have a very low opinion of that creature. Very, very low. And we'll touch on that later on. There's no point in getting all vitriolic about it. You just need to see the evidence, or at least be made aware of certain things about him, which are not good, which don't show him in a good light, which don't show him batting for the English. They show him batting for himself. Surprised? I don't think so. No, you're probably not. So one of the phrases I have thought of is this, is that if you, like Unter Guggenberger in The Town, but like Germany at that period, if you go about and you make the profits and the strength of your economy available to your own people, which is really what it's for, you do it directly. You say, look, we are a nation of people. We are a tribe of people of the same race with our shared and received history, culture, and language. We are these people. We are the Germans. We are the English. We are the French, whatever it may be. And if you say it is right and sound that by our own efforts we should directly benefit from these things, you're in trouble. You're going to get bombed. Germany did. Germany got bombed. The war was about the annihilation of the Germans. Not because I say so, but because you need to look at the statistics. That's all it is. The numbers don't lie, if you can get hold of them, of course. And we've had an example recently, haven't we, within recent living memory, which is Libya, which has a direct bearing, of course, on the so-called migrant crisis. It's not a migrant crisis, by the way. It's a mentally defective political class crisis. This is a result of their insane, evil, sloth and stupidity, these midwits that are in charge everywhere. But Gaddafi was demonized and killed in the most brutal and foul way, I think courtesy of the instructions of Hillary Clinton. What a noble and beautiful lady she turned out not to be. Why? Why would they do that in Libya? There's a thing, called Gaddafi's folly. He spent $14 billion on it. It was not a folly at all. He laid in a water pipe to provide free water to farms and made the land bloom. You know the phrase, by their fruits shall ye know them. It's a very simple and permanently workable and effective rule of thumb, or rule of fruit. And that's what he did. When you got married in Libya, they would give you $10,000 to get started so you could look after your children well. Didn't they do something similar in Germany? By golly jingo, they did. They did. This information, is this ever put on the BBC in their World at War documentaries? I should think not. Even to this day, even to this very day, that there are pieces of information about that conflict and how it came about that undermine the entire mainstream media narrative. It's a comic book story that you've been fed on. A joke. An absolute joke of a story, but guess what? People swallow joke stories. Look at COVID. We've all been able to witness it firsthand, have we not? So the Germans, I would suggest, really coming back to the question, is there something in the German character? Yeah, there is. It's called engineering, I guess. We as the English admire the German engineering history. Of course, they're having a terrible time now because they're governed by the same sort of liberal retards that we are. These godless, evil twerps. And we admire it. They have, of course, not been a country since 1945. They've basically been a company. Germany is an AG, N-A-G. It's like the German equivalent of a limited concern. And this is why there's the largest concentration, maybe it's not the same now, but the largest concentration of US troops on the ground. Basically, enforcement officers for the bank and their holdings. You think not? It's very complex. Red Symphony is a vital document for understanding that conflict. Vital. If you don't have that document, and maybe I'll list it in the Telegram group or elsewhere, which you need to be a part of. If you don't like Telegram, by the way, and somebody can suggest something else, we could certainly use it. I'm at the limit of the amount of time I can spend policing these things. Terrible word, isn't it? But it's true. And so these things need looking after. It's very important that they don't get riven with ridiculous comments and stuff like that, which can happen. And someone's just written here, Germany is still occupied until 2099, by the way. It probably is. It probably is. And a ridiculous state of affairs. You have to bear in mind as well that most of the English are Germans. We're Saxons, right? And so this cutting the bankers out of their profits, I view it as a primary reason for that conflict. Primary. A major reason. Also, the bankers were about to lose control of their investment in Russia. The Russian Revolution, as many of you know, was not Russian at all and was paid for from Kern Loeb and co. out of the States, who are basically a sort of a Rothschild affiliate bank, and out of London. And Karl Marx sat on his brains, didn't he, in the British Lending Library for 20 years, writing that crap. And someone had to pay for his sandwiches and look after him and his great hairdo, don't you think? Oh, Carl, your hair's a bit long. You need it cutting off. You can't see all that crap that you're writing. It's true. Or however he spoke. Lovely man. Stupid ideas. Stupid man. Stupid ideas is the truth of it. So all the isms come out of it. Communism, capitalism, fascism, democratism. I just made that one up. Conservatism, republicanism. What's the current one? Communitarianism. How about bullshitism? We've been trained to think that we live in a capitalist society, and I guess you do. But the really interesting observation is that the vast majority of us are not capitalists. Not now, not then, and we never will be. Not according to G.K. Chesterton, the highly intelligent, articulate, charming, witty, and wonderful writer of 100 years ago. Chesterton's definition of a capitalist is great. He said, from memory, something along the lines of this. He said, a capitalist is a person who owns enough stuff. What is stuff? Cows, sheep, pigs, land, shares, factories, rentable housing, that he doesn't or she doesn't have to lift a finger, and the income that comes off of the capital holdings pays for the cost of his or her life. Hardly anybody's a capitalist. And of course, the idea was to pit capitalism against communism. But capitalism only works for a very short period of time, I think. I mean, I could be wrong. People would argue and say, it's the greatest thing since sliced bread. We got out of the... You don't know. You don't know that. We don't know anything much because the entire monetary system has been distorted every minute of its day in England since 1694. It only took them a few years, to spend 3 million quid more than existed back in the 1690s. They just can't resist. They go mad with it. Which is the big challenge, The bankers will say, oh, you can't trust the government. And the government are told not to actually push it. There used to be a big series of debates about who should own the bank. Well, the people should own the bank. The people need to own the bank. How do we own the bank? That's what we need to be thinking about. How do we get about to owning it? Well, I'll cover these ideas as we go through, some of them. We've got news and fun and games to have and toffees to share out and things like that, but I guess I'm on a bit of a mission night to sort of cover things, give you the path I came into this field. So we go through banking. The banking actually also took me to the Bible because I needed to find out what the Bible said about money. That led me into another area, which all loops back in on itself. Everything, if you've been looking at this stuff for some time, is interconnected. It all comes back. There's a pattern. And it's about the exertion of will. Who will be master is the key thing. And irrespective of the amount of intellectual power we might have available to pull together, in the end, it's about the exertion of will, the corruption of people, and the desire of certain individuals who are basically ruthless to dominate all life, a bit like Sauron from Lord of the Rings. And it's exactly the same line. What did Tolkien write? For all of them were deceived. So Germany, it's a massive tale. And I do like to talk about it very much because it seems to reverberate with me right up to this present day. Now, the COVID thing has shut down a lot of historical stuff because we actually now, instead of talking about it academically and thinking that maybe we could discuss these things and achieve a result, we've become aware that we are surrounded by people who are completely besotted with following government diktat. I have no idea what to do. I found this personally a shock. I don't shock easily. It moved from a euphemism of like, oh yeah, most people are sheep-like and herd-like, to literally seeing it. And not only that, to realize that there was no way for many of these people that you could recover them into a decent conversation. Now, I want to be wrong about all of that. I'm just giving you my observations as they stand now. But I want to be wrong about all of that. I want everybody to sort of, come through and see certain things. And of course, you could say, well, Paul, it's your view. Well, of course it is. I can't have anybody else's. But the idea is to inform it, is to educate it, is to adjust it, is to see really what is really going on. Then maybe we have a chance of organizing ourselves and making decisions in a particular way where we can recover the way of life that inherently in our blood we know we should be leading. We're not leading it. It's not being led for us. I had a really interesting start to my day today. I don't get out much. Today I didn't need to. It's mid-morning. I'm threatening the family as usual. And there's a knock on the door. And I go to the door and there are two septuagenarian gentlemen there, very well dressed with nice English hats on and looking lovely. And it was a beautiful sunny day here where we are today. And they were Jehovah's Witnesses. And I'm never rude to Jehovah's Witnesses because I'll have a chat with anybody, really. And they were great. I really liked them as people. But I did inform them early on. I said, I think I might be a waste of time. They asked me a few questions and I agreed with everything they said without going into the bits that I knew I was going to disagree with them on. Because there was no point, you see. And not at that time. So they said, so we agree on things. I said, oh yeah, I think we do. I said, isn't it all in this book? I said, what we're living through right now? And they said, yes. I said, yeah, it is. I said, I don't know where you get. I said, I've got 6 Bibles in the house. You may be appalled by that, dear listener, when I've just said that. Why do you need so many? Well, I don't know. But I was looking for some that were translated right and trying to learn how to read it right. Because I'm going to suggest that most people have been trained to read it wrong, for want of a better word, incorrectly. And it's to do with misunderstandings around certain key words. And the lessons and principles in there are directly applicable to how we conduct ourselves commercially in the exchange of goods and services, and they're relevant right up to this day. These principles, which are eternal, which are literally the law for us, in my humble opinion. They're the law in the sense that they're not up for debate. You can debate them. People can waste their lives debating them, but it will just come round to this time and time again. These are the ground rules of this realm that we live in. And when we behave in line with them, boy, do we thrive. Now, let's go back to the German thing. Here's what happened with Germany. Anybody that's read up on it. In 1933, they were absolutely on their uppers. It was a shocking, appalling state of affairs. I think the suicide rate amongst German women was 10,000 a week or a month. Horrific. Think about that. These are good people who've been brought low, as many of our people have, and they're seeking to bring us low right now. You know it. The form may be different, but the substance and the experience is exactly the same. Demoralize people, ruin their lives, destroy their culture, run them down, not give them a chance to speak. What's going on right now? All of this stuff, right? If you don't feel anger about this stuff, there's something not right with you. And if people don't feel anger, your job is to make them angry. You've got to set them on fire. I think, you don't have to take my suggestion, you've got to find a skillful way of doing it. We need to set our own people burning like a blaze, smouldering, with fire in their eyes. They've got to reconnect. So in 1933, It's very, very bad. So bad most of us can't really relate to it. It's awful. When that party comes to power, and yes, there were machinations behind it and all that kind of stuff, but when they come to power, 3 years later, all of that is a distant memory. 3 years, the duration of COVID, right? If we were to do the same things now, within 3 years, if we'd have done them during COVID, COVID would have been bearable because we would have been transforming our economy into one that served us as opposed to us serving it. What are the media always, when they're banging on about economic figures, I mean, does anybody pay any attention to this nonsense? It's piffle. It's completely retarded. It's like an engineer being clueless about the strength of a metal and then telling you he's going to build a bridge out of it and it keeps falling down. You go, have you actually looked into the fundamentals of the materials that you're using? Oh, no, I just thought it'd stand up. It looks good, though, doesn't it? Well, it did for about an hour. That's the sort of thing that we're dealing at. Look, I'm over-egging the custard. I'm over-exaggerating it. There are people that have spent a long time studying all this stuff and they want to talk about it because they've got a knowledge base about it. But I think they've wasted their life on it. Because it's not about the principles, is it? If you live in an honourable, decent, truthful society, you could use feathers for money. Of course we don't. And none of us are perfect. And people go through a growth phase when they're young, have been on the take. Ooh, I think I could cut a corner here and do a bit of that. It's all part of the learning curve. It happens. So I'm not naive enough to think it wouldn't. But that's what I'm saying. So why would a people let an external agency sit in charge of its money supply? Why would you do that? Let's suppose there were 50,000 of us and we all went to an island somewhere that had not been burnt down by direct energy weapons like Hawaii or whatever. Suppose you could find one. Isle of Man, right in the middle of the sea here between Ireland and England. It's a good size. They have a fantastic motorbike race there every year, which is absolutely off the charts. If you want to see men who's... Never mind. I was going to use a very vulgar analogy there, and you probably know what I was going to say, but that's something to take a look at. It's an astonishing spectacle. It really is. From a courage point of view, unbelievable. Let's suppose we all go to the Isle of Man, and we go, what are we going to do? Well, we go, we need barbers and plumbers and all that, and people all write down on a list. And would we say, you know what we need? We need some other people to come in from China and supply us with all our money, don't we? We really need that because, we just do. You would never say that in a million years. You would never say that in a million years because it's about as stupid a thing as you could possibly do. And guess what? You and I live under this stupid thing called a central bank, which has perverted everything. It's perverted the law. It's perverted the media. It perverts the entertainment industry. It perverts the education system. People are bought and paid for. They need to pay off their mortgage. Here you are listening to this. Here I am saying this. And this is one of many shows and venues where people are wanting to talk about these things. It's wonderful. And we need to keep it going. But the situation is... sorry, I got distracted. I've got to turn the screen off, don't I? See, I'm learning a few little habits here that I've got to avoid. Otherwise, I'm going to get sucked into stuff. Where was I? I've completely gone right up my own orifice there. It happens from time to time. And I think completely distracted me. Apologies for that. Will it come back to me? Brain's frazzled. Near the end of the show. That's what it is. Not enough gin. We would never put anybody else in charge of our banking system because it perverts everything. And yet here we are having lived a life under that shadow, which most people are completely unaware of. You have to earn money and get on and do life because that's the game as it's been designed. But it's the wrong game. It's the wrong game. It doesn't need to be played that way. National Socialist Germany stopped playing the game that way. They said, we don't need your gold. We don't need it, frankly. What do we need gold for? You can't eat it. No, we don't need that. So they entered into these very large-scale barter arrangements, particularly with countries like from South America. Obviously very good at making printing presses. Everybody's aware of Heidelberg, and there'll be other manufacturers over there. Wonderfully heavy, marvellous pieces of machinery. Where I came from in Leeds, there was a company that used to make printing presses running. Was it Vickers or something? Fantastic bits of kit. Great, Boys like this sort of stuff at a certain age. Maybe it's their entire life, I don't know. But you just get impressed. You go, wow, this is good stuff. And the Germans are outstanding at it. So they did a lot of barter. And within 3 years, everybody's back on their feet, 1936. 2 years later, I think it is, 1938, Mr. Hitler is Times Magazine's Man of the Year. Isn't he? Time Magazine's Man of the Year. So, what are we to say about that? 2 years later, he's the most evil man that ever lived. Well, of course he is. He was about to chin the banks. They couldn't have... Think about it. This is my take on it, right? There'll be somebody that will come in with a different view, and I'm really open to hearing about it. I can't today. I haven't got any guests on, but as we find them and develop it, this will develop as a discussion. They couldn't have people arriving in Germany saying, what are you doing? And they'd say it just like that, of course, because they're either chirpy people, aren't they, international diplomats? No, they would be extremely ponderous and full of sagacity. And they would say, what are you doing? How come this has happened so fast? And they would have explained it to them, and then they would have all started doing it, a bit like the mayors in Austria from Unter Guggenberger's highly effective plan. Massively effective. The parasitical banker cannot have the economy work for the benefit of the people that produce for the economy. It must work for the benefit of them. People that have hundreds of billions or trillions of pounds did not earn that through honest labour. They earned it through deception, corruption, bribery, murder, the lot. There's a history of it up and down the line. These people might not have to do that these days, but they come from a line of people that have done those sorts of things, lied, deceived, and all that kind of stuff. It's fair game, you know. We're all in a competitive place and we can plunder you. What was that, that ape, Rockefeller, what did he say? He said, competition is a sin. What he meant was competition with me and my ensconced power interest is a sin. You're not allowed to do it. We've already won. We're in charge of everything. And I think another point to observe, I mentioned it a little bit earlier, this thing about communism was designed, paid for and bought for by the capitalist people. Because communism is the ultimate expression of capitalism. Yeah, it wants communism. Because the best client is an entire country organised like a hive colony paying taxes. Now, in the Communist Manifesto, I'm just checking the time, 43 minutes past. I think we wind up here in about, I can't remember now, because we're on a stream and this, that, and the other. I'm going to wind up on time, by the way. I don't want to get into the habit of overrunning. Famous last words. Look, I've done it again. I need someone around me to say, Paul, you were talking about this. This thing with the banking situation is such that they don't want the economy serving the people. They just don't want it. So the solutions are available for us to tap into, but we have to find a way of applying them. This has been the great challenge, because when they've been applied, people die. That's what's happened. There's a great man over here after World War One. Major Douglas, his name came into my head. I'm just warming up my old circuits. Last 2 years, I intentionally stopped reading things because I've been reading for like 15 years, and I thought, I think I need to give this a break. It's coming back to me. There's a guy called Major C.H. Douglas, worth just noting right here. Douglas came up with something similar. He was brought in by the MOD to sort out biplane production during the tail end of the war or just after the war. He was an engineer, built massive railway systems in Argentina. Brilliant chap. He sat down, a bit like Silvio Gesell did, and looked at this production line for these planes. And he discovered something alarmingly mad. We still live in this alarming madness, right? No matter what they say, we still live in this. He found that there were fuselages and engines and wings and everything was there. But it couldn't move around because people didn't have pieces of paper to pay off something on an account book to make it move. He said, this is absolutely ridiculous. We obviously, self-evidently, have the capacity to make things because they've been made. But nobody dare move things because there's insufficient purchasing power to move these things around. He came up with an idea called social credit. Now, universal credit, which they're applying now, is sort of derived from that, but is, as usual, perverted by them to suit their agenda. That is, you don't get any control. They don't want that. You might start living for yourself, next thing. So this sort of dinosaur approach to all of these things that they have is what's keeping us stuck. What about CBDCs, central bank digital currencies, which they're all giddy about and jumping around and doing things, and going, ooh, I love all this. This is great. There's actually nothing really wrong with them, is there? It doesn't really matter what they supply us with. I mean, I like notes. I think we should get back to them. I mean, you can't make any more films about bank robberies now. What are they going to do? Some nerds, with pipe cleaner arms plodding around on a computer. I've just hacked it. It's not particularly tense or exciting. But guys with stockings over their head, roaming through the night with shotguns, I want movies like that, really. They're not going to make too much sense if there's no cash to rob out of the safe. They probably don't even have safes. Of course, you can say, well, you've got to move with the times, but I prefer not to, frankly. They're a bit daft, aren't they? Well, with some of the bits. Yeah, the issue with the central bank, because I'm going to go through a list of things. I better bring this up, actually, right now. The thing with the bank, where did I put this? I've got a little note somewhere. Dum, 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 dum. See, you end up talking to yourself when you're doing it all Billy Nomis. It's kind of weird. The issue with the bank is that you don't own it. I don't own it. And you must exclusively own it. That's it. Instead of getting a birth certificate when you're born, which they use to ramp up lending using your perceived income tax payments as collateral for the loan, why don't you get issued with a share in the Bank of England in our case, or a share in the Federal Reserve, or whatever you want to call it? Why don't you get that? For life. Non-transferable, one. Everybody gets just one, whoever you are. Irrespective of how much money you think you've got in the system, you only get one. And every time that system generates a little profit, maybe there's a divvy. Now, I'm getting nerd-like now because we're going into systems, and this is drifting away from the emotive side of it. But ownership is absolutely vital. Why? Because it stops other people owning it over you. That's all it is. It stops cartels cartelizing the thing, and then you ending up being their slaves. Yeah. Didn't Jefferson say something to that effect, or was it Benjamin Franklin? If you allow the bankers, notice my language, to move in, and you allow this, you won't keep the republic, and in 200 years your children will wake up and they'll be the slaves of these people. Hey ho. See, so even knowing it hasn't stopped it happening. And many, many people up and down history know this stuff. There's a kind of weakness in us, or there's some flaw in the way that we operate, an excessive, pointless, mad, counterproductive kindliness. I don't know what to call it at the moment, but we'll address this and go through it. Now, enough of banking for today. By golly, I banged on about that too much. I wrote a list out of the sorts of areas that I'm aiming to cover in the show as we move through. Just looking at the time here, I've got about 10 minutes. And I'm going to read it out to you, maybe stopping off for a brief comment or two. The money power was at the top of the list. I think I'll have to move that down. I think we've done enough on that for one day today. Culture. I want to talk about culture, obviously. I want to talk about film. There's a good film coming out, isn't there, in a couple of months? I think it'll be good. Napoleon, which leads me to Hitherto Hidden History. Between now and the Napoleon film, which is due out, I think, on Thanksgiving Day, so end of November, is that? Something like that. Correct me if I'm wrong. Third Thursday of November? I don't know. That film's out. Made by, what's his name? Scott. My brain's failing me tonight. This is terrible. I'm very embarrassed. The guy that made Alien, him, and Gladiator, which was outstanding. So I'm interested to see what they include and what they don't include. Napoleon's life is astonishing and in many ways parallels the life of Mr. Hitler in terms of defending something. The French Revolution has got one of the most hellish feelings about it, and the origins of that, of course, are in London, courtesy of the Intercontinental Club and another club, and arranged it, and it was a bloodbath of the most horrific type. You can't do things like that. Anyway, it happened. Architecture. I want to look at architecture. I don't really want to look at it. Not modern architecture. It's repellent. And most of the buildings that have been put up in the world that are modern architecture need to be just torn down as fast as we possibly can. They're disgusting. I'm talking about things like the Shard and the Gherkin and this other wreckage that they put up that is disharmonious, sends out the wrong frequency, and basically subdues and depresses people, i.e. demoralizes them. That's my take on it. And when you hear these architects poncing on about glass and steel and space and light and all this other stuff, really, honestly. Ooh, I better not say that sentence that just jumped into my head. Otherwise, I will be for it. The cult. The overall name for the problem that we found. Let's just call it the cult. It's got many departments to it. Jesuits, Sabbateans, Masons. Masons are a very good target for us. Very powerful group. They kind of do a lot of dogleg work on the ground. England, of course, is riven with it. All of the judiciary and so on and so forth. I know barristers that didn't sign up for Masonry, and their careers were not as spectacular as they would have been, I'm reasonably sure. So we're going to look at all of those aspects of these so-called hidden, societies. They're not hidden at all, really. I want to look at hitherto hidden history. HHH. Actually, those three words go high, which is incredibly limp-wristed, so I won't be calling it that. But hitherto hidden history is a key thing. The technocracy, the misapplication of technocratic claptrap to effectively do nothing more than to bind us up into this, that, and the other, all on the spurious reason of making the economy more efficient. We don't need it more efficient. We don't even know what it is because you keep furnishing us with crap money, right? I want good. Well, let's get some good money and get the proper thing sorted out, and we'll find out what's important. Scripture. I want to look at scripture from a different light. I'll be dropping that in little doses, right? It takes a little bit of time. Poetry. In fact, I've got a poem here. If I've got enough time, we might end on it. Poetry. Poetry, because it's a part of that space for us, which is beauty. What did Dostoevsky say? Beauty will save the world. For us, it will. We need it. It's not some casual thing. It's not a casual thing. You need it. You need it in your life. When you're in the presence of beauty, you're reminded of something else greater than yourself, and we need that as a people. Audiobook extracts. I might read little sections from books. I'm planning to do that and throw them in. It give me a break from, talking live maybe and forgetting what I'm talking about. Film, I think I mentioned that before. Waistcoats, we've got to look at waistcoats. I've just thrown that in for no reason whatsoever. Illustrators, I want to talk about illustrators, the ones that I love. People like Gustave Doré. If you're not familiar, start looking him up now. Astonishing work, very inspiring to look at, just makes you go to different planets instantaneously. Then we need to look at NGOs, non-governmental organizations. We need to look, of course, at Klaus Schwab and his pals at the World Economic Forum. Klaus, I've got the most ridiculous theatrical pantomime Austrian accent because they picked me for that so that you all think I'm a Nazi. Psychological programming, warfare, nutcase, Sado, what a mediocre actor he is. The EU, silly thing. The United Nations, Fabians, the Fabian Society, Sabbateans, the Pilgrim Society, Masons. I'm mentioning these ones again, but I'll just run through it because I see I've written it down. The London School of Economics, the Tavistock Institute, MI5, CIA, blah, 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 blah. There's several, a Club of Rome. I know a lot about all of these sorts of things. I've just been immersed reading their garbage for years. So we'll cover that, and there'll be many people here that'll know more than me, and that's how we're going to interact. We're going to do that. Tattoos. We're going to look at tattoos. I don't like tattoos. Okay, have I just lost you? Have you all gone? Right, that's it. I'm off. Count me out. So I'm joking with some of these. Men and women. Apparently they exist, and they're the only type of people that do exist, men and women. So you know where I'm going with that one. Can we touch that one? Is it the big... No, we have to address it. There's a mental madness in the world. Education, which actually means literally to draw out from within, but has been turned into the very opposite of effectively conditioning people to absorb nonsense and to make them obedient to the authority figure at the end of the class, the teacher, that thing. So education. Then this line, we want to look at law, common law, biblical law. Common law is an astonishing thing, and I need to know more about it. It springs from the great work that Alfred the Great did with his daughter some 1,000 years or so ago, and there are groups working on applying this and bringing it back into our space, practical things that we need to talk about. We need to be given simple steps to get engaged with it in a practical way. I do, anyway. That's what I need. Wars. I'll be looking at wars. Basically, the banks aren't far behind. In fact, they're the major player. But particularly over the last 600 years, and particularly England since Henry VIII, there's a lot to be said from that period. There's a lot of mess. Psychological programming. We're all undergoing it. How do we deal with it? Language abuse and misuse. definitions of words. Then we get on to biggies. We get on to the most dangerous four-letter Anglo-Saxon swear word of the lot, race. We have to look at that. Then we get to this myth called diversity is our strength, etc. Multiculturalism, a condition which doesn't exist, but we'll explain why they use those words, because we're all going to come together and love one another. And of course, in every instance where that's been attempted, it's the complete opposite, as it is happening right now. And this is not a disrespect to other races. This is a respect for the laws of nature, which we must get back in line with. All races have got to get back in line with that, in my view. And of course, we'll be looking at liberals, globalists, lefties, social justice warriors, and spoons. I put spoons on at the end just to sober up a little bit. That's exactly what we're going to be doing. So let me just have a look at I've just got to check my clock. I can't remember what time we're actually ending here. Oh, I am using the royal we, aren't I? It's not really the royal we, it's me. What time is this actually ending? Let me just have a look, because I think I'm still within limits. I've got a couple of minutes left. And I'm sorry I've not read out as many of your brilliant comments as I should, but that will happen as we pick up speed and go ahead with this thing. I've learnt certain weaknesses in the arrangement. I've got 2 minutes left. I'm going to read you a poem. Here we go. You ready? If I can find it. Can I get this quick? Where's it gone? I think I've got this. Boy, I'm going to have to rework on my layout next week. I'm clicking like a maniac here. My little finger's going like mad. My son, said the Norman Baron, I am dying, and you will be heir to all the broad acres in England that William gave me for share, when he conquered the Saxon at Hastings, and a nice little handful it is. But before you go over to rule it, I want you to understand this. The Saxon is not like us Normans. His manners are not so polite. But he never means anything serious till he talks about justice and right. When he stands like an ox in the furrow, with his sullen set eyes on your own, and grumbles, this isn't fair dealing. My son, leave the Saxon alone. You can horsewhip your Gascony archers or torture your Picardy spears, but don't try that game on the Saxon. You'll have the whole brood round your ears. From the richest old thane in the county to the poorest chained serf in the field, they'll be at you and on you like hornets, and if you are wise, you will yield. But first, you must master their language, their dialect, proverbs and songs. Don't trust any clerk to interpret when they come with the tale of their wrongs. Let them know that you know what they're saying. Let them feel that you know what to say. Yes, even when you want to go hunting, hear 'em out if it takes you all day. They'll drink every hour of the daylight and poach every hour of the dark. It's the sport, not the rabbits they're after. We've plenty of game in the park. Don't hang them or cut off their fingers. That's wasteful as well as unkind. For a hard-bitten South Country poacher makes the best man-at-arms you can find. Appear with your wife and the children at their weddings and funerals and feasts. Be polite, but not friendly to bishops. Be good to all poor parish priests. Say we, us, and ours when you're talking, instead of you fellows and I. Don't ride over seeds. Keep your temper. And never you tell 'em a lie. Here endeth the show, I think, just looking at the time. It certainly ends for the simulcast on Speak Free Radio. I'm going to wind it up here on Rumble, so we will have overrun a little bit, I think, on Speak Free Radio, and probably cut off midday. I read this and just want to make one last little comment for today. Thank you for joining me. And I read this for these two little lines. There's some amazing stuff from Kipling. They'll be at you and on you like hornets. Ladies and gentlemen, I think becoming more like hornets would serve us well. We must become sharp-tongued, in my view, fiery-eyed, and ready to go. War is being waged on us, you know it, in an extremely odd way, something that we're not used to. We are having psychological warfare waged upon us all the time. And I'm very keen on learning how to deal with that. We're not here to resist them. We're here to effectively make them irrelevant. There was that old phrase, Star Trek, I'm sorry to go to it. It's a sad note to end on, isn't it? I'm not a fan, by the way, but someone once told me this, and I think it's kind of true. There was this thing called the Borg in it, probably named after Bjorn Borg, the great tennis player, you know? And so they call them the Borg, and they're a rather horrible lot. I think they're probably a vision of what the elite have got for us, just going around with bits stuck in them, all doing the same thing, talking nonsense. They had a phrase that resistance is futile. But some of these computer nerds that I knew when it was current, they thought that this was not as strong, because that's what they used in the film, as when on the TV series. Apparently in the TV series, they said resistance is irrelevant. But I actually think there's something else. I think resistance is counterproductive, because whatever you resist persists. We have enough creative power and force, if we can bring it together, to really make this work. So that's it for this week. I've learned a lot from running and managing this thing rather poorly at times tonight. My apologies for going a little bit skew with. I know how to lay my 2 screens out a little bit better next week so that I'm not reaching and clicking for this, that, and the other. I'm going to sign off now. I'll look at some of the comments in the chat, particularly on Rumble and on Odyssey if you've been there. I'm probably going to drop Odyssey for now, just to let you know, because it's actually a little bit too much for me to cope with, having to deal with all these multiple platforms. It didn't really work for me. It caused a few, my mind's sort of looking at too much stuff, and that's where I kind of lost my train of thought, which is not good. But that's what we're going to do. And the audio, by the way, the direct audio feed on the website will always be there, will always be good. It's there right now. And at some point tomorrow, if you go to the website, the recording of this show will be made available. That's going to take a little while because I don't even have all that set up. Normally it's very, very quick, but not today. So there we go. Thank you very much. Let me just go and have a look at some comments, see what everybody's saying. Clear off or something like that. No, I know you won't say that. Brilliant. Thank you very much. Thanks very much for being here. And first of many, I hope. And lots of marketing to be done, because I would also, see, I've always got something else to say. I can't shut up. The great challenge I feel that we've got is one of marketing. There are a lot of people to reach, and we have to be very skillful about how we reach certain people. At least I think that. There are people, it's like being on different steps of knowledge. There are people that know a lot more than I do about certain things. You're then moving into very long-standing fields of knowledge, and you have to kind of prove yourself before you get close to those things, and it's important. It's important, Socrates, or Socrates, as he's called, fell foul of that. He was teaching things that he was not allowed to teach. And you go, well, what's the problem with that? There is a problem with it. It's a bit like giving a machine gun to a 14-year-old. You don't want to be doing that. They might, it's not wise. I mean, it's probably not wise to give a machine gun to anybody, but certainly not a 14-year-old who's just come out of a movie, So it's that kind of thing. We have to be careful about stuff, and also really to suss people out, and yet we don't have too much time either. So the 2030 agenda thing is their plan. They're on it, 24/7. They're all getting paid. We're not. That's the big difference. We have to find these ways, these manners of... I'm not demoralized by that. I actually think it's going well, and I want it to go weller. My last comment, and then I'll hit the cut button. That Greek fella that wrote The Republic, who used to drop all the plates, Plato, right? Him. He got fed up working in the taverna, dropping all the plates. He's dropped them again. So he goes up, becomes a philosopher, said a lot of brilliant things or useful things. There's one that I've got written somewhere, and I wish I had it on the wall, but it's this. It's only 7 words. Those who tell the stories rule society. The invitation to all of us is for us to tell the best stories anybody ever heard. Ever. And we've got the richest source of stories and history to draw upon to do just that, and to engage with our people as fully as we possibly can. So there we go. There's part of the invitation to move forward and get things rocking. I'll wrap up now. Brilliant. Thank you very much for being here tonight. I'll be back next Thursday at the same time, and at some point I might have a guest so that you don't have to listen to just me solid for 2 hours. I was a bit concerned that I won't be able to do it. It turns out I've just got started. Oh boy, what a worry. Thank you very much. I'm going to cut the switch right now, and see you and speak to you all real soon. And if you want to connect up, Telegram, t.me/Paul English. And that's connected to a chat channel on Telegram. So that's what we're using for now. And if people have got any better suggestions about that, we can. But I'm out of time to manage servers. So there we go. Brilliant. Thank you all very much for being here. And this is a new chapter for me. And I quite enjoyed it. And I'll get some more music sorted out next week. Something a bit more chirpy or whatever we're going to do. Thank you. Bye for now.